The ropes burned her wrists. Snow stung her face, and her own father wouldn't meet her eyes as he counted the coins. 18 pieces of silver for a daughter he called worthless. Allara Vance didn't scream, didn't beg. She'd learned long ago that mercy was a lie the world told to people too weak to face the truth. They called her barren, broken, a burden no man would want. But the stranger who bought her wasn't what she expected, and the mountain waiting ahead would demand more than survival. It would demand she become someone entirely new. Stay until the end to see how one woman's fight changed everything. Like this video and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The wagon lurched over frozen ground, and Allara's shoulder slammed against the wooden side rail. She didn't flinch. Pain was just information now, her body reporting damage she couldn't afford to acknowledge. Her brother Marcus sat across from her, jaw tight, staring at anything except her face. His hands were shoved deep in his coat pockets, probably still warm from the coins. "Don't look at me like that," he muttered. Allara said nothing. Her wrists were bound with hemp rope, the kind they used for livestock. Fitting, she supposed. That's exactly what she'd become the moment Dr. Brennan signed that paper. Barren, incapable of bearing children, no value as a wife. The words had spread through their town of Millbrook like cholera. Within a week, her engagement had dissolved. Her friends stopped visiting. Her mother started referring to her in past tense, as if she'd already died. And maybe she had. "It's for the best," Marcus said, voice cracking. He was only 19, barely old enough to grow a proper beard. Pa said, "Pa sold me for $18, Allara cut in. Her voice came out flat, empty. "You can dress it up however you want, won't change what it is." Marcus's face went red. "You think we had a choice? After Ma died, with the farm failing, with your condition? What were we supposed to do? Feed you all winter while you sat around being useless?" There it was, the truth under all the pretty justifications. Useless. The wagon hit another rut. Through the thin walls, Allara could hear her father talking to the driver, his voice too cheerful. Probably already planning how to spend the money. New plowshares, maybe. Or whiskey. Definitely whiskey. The November wind cut through the gaps in the wood. Allara's dress, her only dress now, they'd kept the others, was wool, but threadbare. She'd been wearing it for 3 days. It smelled like fear and wood smoke. "How much further?" she asked. Marcus shrugged. "Another hour, maybe 2. The ranch is up in the high country, past where the mining camps used to be. Ranch. That's what they were calling it. As if this Caleb Ror was some kind of gentleman rancher looking for a housekeeper. As if this wasn't exactly what it looked like, a transaction between desperate people. Allara had heard the rumors about Rourke. Everyone in 3 counties had. His wife had died 2 years back, though nobody seemed to know how. He'd retreated to his property in the mountains and hadn't been seen since. The few trappers who passed through the area reported smoke from his chimney, cattle in his fields, but no sign of the man himself. Some said grief had driven him mad. Others claimed he'd turned into something worse than mad, something cold and calculating. A man who'd learned to live without feeling anything at all. Either way, he'd sent word through a trading post that he needed help. Someone to cook, clean, tend the animals. He'd pay a flat sum up front, no questions asked. Allara's father had seen opportunity. Or maybe just an exit. The wagon slowed. Through a crack in the wood, Allara caught her first glimpse of the property. It wasn't what she'd expected. The cabin was solid, real logs, not rough-hewn planks. 2 stories with a stone chimney pumping steady smoke. There was a barn, a chicken coop, what looked like a smokehouse. Fences in good repair, stacks of firewood that would last through 3 winters. This wasn't the desperate hovel of a madman. This was maintained, planned. The wagon stopped. Allara's father appeared at the back gate, his face carefully neutral. "Come on then, let's get this done." She climbed down, wrists still bound. The cold hit her like a fist. The altitude was higher here, the air thinner, sharper. Snow crunched under her boots. The cabin door opened. Caleb Ror didn't look like a monster. He was tall, maybe 35, with dark hair shot through with premature gray. His face was weathered but not cruel. He wore simple work clothes, flannel shirt, canvas pants, boots that had seen real labor. His eyes were gray, like the winter sky. Those eyes swept over the scene, Allara's bound wrists, her father's too eager expression. Marcus looking sick in the wagon bed. Something changed in Rourke's face. Not anger, exactly. Something colder. "This how you deliver people now, Vance?" His voice was quiet, but it carried. "Tied up like criminals?" Allara's father bristled. "Now see here, we had an agreement." "Agreement was for a housekeeper." Rourke walked forward, each step deliberate. "Not a prisoner." He stopped in front of Allara. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the way his jaw was set. This was a man who'd learned to control everything about himself, including his emotions. "You want to be here?" he asked her directly. The question caught her off guard. Want. As if that mattered. As if she had choices left. "I want to not starve," she said. "That sufficient?" Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or respect. He pulled a knife from his belt. Her father lunged forward. "Now wait just a—" Rourke ignored him. He cut the ropes around Allara's wrists with 2 quick motions. The hemp fell away, leaving angry red marks on her skin. "You're free to go," Rourke said, still looking at her. "There's a town called Silverdale about 15 miles south. Stagecoach comes through twice a week. I'll give you money for fare, enough to get you somewhere with opportunities. Your choice." Allara stared at him. Behind her, she could hear her father sputtering, demanding his payment, saying there'd been an agreement. Rourke finally turned to face him. "You'll get your money when she decides to stay. If she decides to stay. Otherwise, you drove all the way up here for nothing. That's not— You can't just— My property. My rules." Rourke's voice didn't rise, but something in it made Allara's father step back. "You got a problem with that. You can try to do something about it. But I don't think you will." The threat wasn't explicit, didn't need to be. Marcus climbed down from the wagon. "Pa, maybe we should just—" "Shut up." Their father's face was purple now. He turned to Allara. "You ungrateful little, after everything we did for you, giving you a chance when no one else would—" "You sold me," Allara said quietly. "Let's not pretend it was charity." The words hung in the frozen air. Her father opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Fine, fine. You want to throw away the only opportunity you'll ever get. That's on you. Don't come crawling back when—" "She won't," Rourke interrupted. "Now get off my land before I decide hospitality doesn't require being polite to men who sell their daughters." For a moment, Allara thought her father might actually try something. His hand moved toward his coat. But then he caught sight of Rourke's expression and thought better of it. "You'll regret this," he muttered, climbing back onto the wagon. "Both of you." Marcus followed, not looking back. The driver snapped the reins and the wagon pulled away, leaving tracks in the snow. Allara watched until it disappeared around the bend. Then she stood there, in the cold, with a stranger who'd just given her something she'd thought she'd never have again. A choice. "Thank you," she said finally. Rourke shook his head. "Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen what you're choosing." He walked toward the cabin, expecting her to follow. After a moment, she did. Inside was warmer, though not by much. The main room was functional, a cook stove, a rough table, 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies, a few books. No decoration, no softness. This was a place for survival, not comfort. "Work starts at dawn," Rourke said, not looking at her. "You'll cook, clean, tend the chickens, help with the cattle when needed. I'll teach you what you don't know. You'll sleep upstairs, second room. Door has a lock. Use it." He paused, then turned to face her. "I'm not looking for a wife. Not looking for company. Not looking for anything except someone who can do the work. You can stay as long as you pull your weight. When you want to leave, I'll pay you for your time and arrange transport. That clear?" Allara nodded slowly. "What if I can't do the work? Then we'll figure out what you can do." He crossed his arms. "I'm not your father. I'm not interested in making you feel worthless, but I won't carry dead weight either. This place demands effort. You give it, you stay. You don't, you go. Simple as that." It should have felt harsh. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing anyone had said to her in months. "I can work," Allara said. "We'll see." Rourke moved toward the stove. "You eaten today?" She hadn't. Not since yesterday morning. But admitting that felt like admitting weakness. Rourke seemed to read it in her silence. He pulled out a pot, started adding ingredients. "Sit. You'll start tomorrow. Today you rest." "I don't need—" Wasn't a question. Allara sat. She watched him work. His movements were efficient, practiced. He didn't waste motion. Everything had a purpose. When he set a bowl in front of her, venison stew still steaming, she had to force herself not to grab it like a starving animal. The first bite was the best thing she'd tasted in weeks. Real meat, vegetables, seasoning that actually had flavor. Rourke ate standing up, his back to her. Neither of them spoke. When she finished, he gestured toward the stairs. Second door on the right. There's a basin and pitcher up there, blankets in the chest. If you need anything else, it can wait until morning. Allara climbed the stairs, her legs shaky from cold and exhaustion. The room he'd indicated was small but clean. A bed, an actual bed, not a straw mat. A chest. A window that looked out over the mountains. She sat down on the mattress and started shaking, not from cold, from the sudden, overwhelming weight of everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, she'd been in Millbrook, watching her father count coins. Now she was here, in the mountains, with a stranger who'd cut her free and fed her, and expected nothing except work. It didn't make sense. People didn't act like this. They didn't give without taking. They didn't offer freedom without strings. She waited for the trap to reveal itself. For Rourke to come upstairs with different intentions. For the kindness to crack and show the rot underneath. But the only sound was the wind outside and the creak of floorboards as Rourke moved around downstairs. Eventually, exhaustion won. Allara pulled off her boots, crawled under the blankets, and fell into a sleep so deep it felt like drowning. She woke to darkness and the sound of someone moving in the room. Panic hit first. Alara's hand scrambled for something, anything, to use as a weapon. Her fingers closed around the water pitcher. "It's 4:30, Rourke's voice came from the doorway. "You've got 30 minutes before I expect you downstairs." Then he was gone. Allara sat there, heart hammering, pitcher still gripped in her fist. 4:30. In the morning. She hadn't woken up this early since... Actually, she couldn't remember. Moving felt like pushing through mud. Every muscle ached, but she forced herself up, splashed icy water on her face, and made her way downstairs. Rourke was already dressed, standing by the stove. He nodded toward a second coat hanging by the door. "That'll fit you better than what you're wearing. We're checking the cattle first, then chickens, then breakfast." "In the dark?" "Lanterns on the table." Right, of course. The coat was heavy canvas, lined with wool. It smelled like wood smoke and animal. Allara shrugged it on and followed Rourke outside. The cold was vicious, the kind that made your lungs hurt and your eyes water. The lantern light created a small circle of gold in the darkness, but beyond that the world was black and vast. The cattle were in a sheltered pasture, maybe 40 head. Rourke moved among them with practiced ease, checking for injuries, counting, making sure the water trough hadn't frozen solid. "You see one limping? You tell me," he said. "You see one separated from the herd? You tell me. You see blood in the snow? You tell me immediately." Allara tried to focus, but her brain felt sluggish. Everything looked the same, dark shapes moving in darker shadows. "There," Rourke pointed. "Second from the left. See how she's favoring her front leg?" Allara squinted. "Maybe? Possibly? I think so." "You think or you know?" "I think." "Then look again, don't guess. This isn't about being right. It's about seeing what's actually there." She looked. Really looked. And yes, there it was. A subtle hitch in the animal's gait. "She's limping," Allara said, more certain now. "Good. We'll check her after breakfast. Might be nothing, might be an abscess, won't know until we look." They moved to the chicken coop. Rourke showed her how to collect eggs without getting pecked, how to check for signs of illness, how to distribute feed so the aggressive birds didn't dominate. By the time they got back to the cabin, Alara's hands were numb despite the gloves he'd given her. Her face felt frozen, her body was already exhausted, and the sun wasn't even up yet. "You'll make breakfast," Rourke said, shedding his coat. "Eggs, bacon, biscuits. There's a recipe book on the shelf if you need it." Allara stared at the stove. She'd cooked before, of course, but not like this, not on an unfamiliar stove, with ingredients she didn't know, for someone who clearly had standards. Her hands shook as she cracked the first egg. It broke wrong, shell fragments falling into the bowl. "Fish them out," Rourke said from across the room. He was cleaning the lantern, not even looking at her. They won't kill us, but they're not pleasant. She fished them out, cracked 3 more eggs, started on the bacon. The first batch burned. Not badly, but enough that the smell filled the cabin. Rourke walked over, looked at the pan, looked at her. Heat's too high, lower it, start again. I'm wasting food. You're learning. Different thing. He pulled the burned bacon out, tossed it. Try again. The second batch was better, still not perfect, but edible. The biscuits were a disaster. Dense, undersalted, somehow both raw in the middle and too brown on top. Rourke ate them anyway. Didn't complain, didn't comment, just ate what she'd made and drank his coffee. Tomorrow will be better, he said when they were done. Or it won't. Either way, you'll learn. The day continued like that. Task after task, each one harder than it should have been. Hauling water, chopping wood, mucking out stalls. Her hands blistered within hours. Her back screamed. She slipped in the mud and caught herself on a fence post, scraping her palm raw. Rourke worked alongside her, demonstrating techniques, correcting errors, but never doing the work for her. If she struggled, he'd watch until she figured it out or until it became clear she genuinely couldn't, then he'd show her a different approach. By the time darkness fell again, Allara could barely stand. Tomorrow 4:30, Rourke said. You'll be sore. Work through it. Allara dragged herself upstairs, collapsed on the bed still wearing her clothes, fell asleep before she could think about what fresh hell tomorrow would bring. The second day was worse. Everything hurt. Muscles she didn't know she had announced themselves with sharp, vindictive pain. Getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain. But Rourke was already downstairs, already moving, and she'd said she could work. So she worked. Day 3, her hands bled through the gloves. Rourke gave her salve and bandages, showed her how to wrap them properly, and sent her back out to finish. Day 4, a chicken escaped while she was collecting eggs. She spent 40 minutes chasing it through the snow while Rourke watched, arms crossed, expression unreadable. You're giving up too easy, he said when she finally cornered it. It's a chicken, not a wolf. It's more scared than you are. Doesn't feel like it, Allara muttered, clutching the squawking bird. Most things don't feel like what they are. That's why you trust what you can see, not what you feel. Day 5, she got the biscuits right. They were golden, fluffy, actually good. Rourke ate 3 of them. See? You can learn. It wasn't praise exactly, but it felt like acknowledgement. Day 6, her body started to adapt. The soreness faded to a dull ache. Her hands toughened. She could split wood without stopping every 5 minutes. Day 7, it snowed. Not the light dustings they'd had before. This was serious. Thick, wet flakes that came down in curtains. By midday, everything was buried under 6 inches. Storm's coming, Rourke said, standing at the window. Real one, not just this. We need to bring everything in close. They spent the afternoon moving supplies, securing shutters, bringing extra firewood inside. The cattle were moved to the sheltered pasture nearest the barn. The chickens were checked twice. By the time they finished, Allara was soaked through and shivering. Change, Rourke ordered. Dry clothes. Hypothermia kills faster than anything else up here. She went upstairs, peeled off the wet layers, found dry clothes in the chest. When she came back down, Rourke had coffee waiting. They sat at the table as the storm built outside. Wind howled around the cabin. Snow piled against the windows. This could last days, Rourke said. Maybe a week. You scared? Allara thought about it. Should I be? Most people would be. Stuck on a mountain with a stranger, no way out. You could have hurt me a dozen times by now. Haven't yet. Rourke's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Fair point. They sat in silence, listening to the storm. Why'd you buy me? Allara asked suddenly. The question had been building for days. Rourke was quiet for a long moment. Didn't buy you. Bought your time. Different thing. Semantics. No. Truth. He stared into his coffee. I needed help. You needed out. Transaction made sense. You could have hired anyone, someone who actually knew what they were doing. Could have. He met her eyes. But most people can't handle the isolation. They last a month, maybe 2. Then they can't stand the quiet anymore. They need people, noise, civilization. He paused. Figured someone who'd been through what you had might understand the appeal of being somewhere no one could reach you. It was the most he'd said about himself since she'd arrived. "What happened to your wife?" Allara asked. The shutters came down. Rourke's face went blank, closed off. "That's not your business." "You knew about me. Seems fair." "I knew what your father told me, that you'd been declared barren and needed work. That's not the same as knowing you." "Then tell me what I should know," Allara pressed. "If we're going to be stuck here together." Rourke stood up, walked to the window. Outside, the snow had turned the world white and formless. "Her name was Sarah," he said finally. "We had this place for 5 years. She loved it here. Then one winter she got sick, fever, cough. I thought it was just a cold. By the time I realized it was pneumonia, it was too late. Nearest doctor was 2 days away. She died before I could get help." His voice was flat, reciting facts, but his hands were clenched on the windowsill. "I'm sorry," Allara said. "Don't be. Sorry doesn't fix anything." He turned back to face her. "I stayed because leaving felt like abandoning her, and because out here, I don't have to pretend to be something I'm not." "What would you have to pretend to be?" "Over it." The honesty of it cut through everything else. Allara thought about Millbrook, about her father's house, about all the places she'd had to pretend her life was fine, even as it crumbled around her. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I understand that." The storm howled on. Listen. 3 days into being snowed in, Allara discovered the books. They were on a shelf in the corner, spine-worn and well-read. Poetry, mostly. Whitman, Dickinson, some names she didn't recognize. "You can read them," Rourke said from across the room. He was mending a harness, his hands moving with steady precision. Allara pulled down a volume, opened it to a random page. Hope is the thing with feathers. She'd read this one before, back when she'd had a teacher who believed girls should be educated, back before everything fell apart. "Sarah's," Rourke said. "She used to read them out loud, said poetry made the winter shorter." "Did it work?" "Sometimes." Allara read in silence for a while. Outside, the wind screamed, but inside, the words created a different kind of space. "You miss her," she said. Not a question. "Every day." "But you keep going. Don't have much choice. Cattle need feeding whether I'm grief-stricken or not." He knotted the leather, tested the repair. "That's the thing about this life. It doesn't care about your feelings. It just demands you show up." "Sounds lonely." "It is." Rourke set down the harness. "But lonely's better than surrounded by people who pity you. Or worse, people who think 2 years is long enough and you should move on already." Allara understood that too. The well-meaning neighbors in Millbrook who told her mother's death was for the best. The friends who'd stopped inviting her places after the diagnosis. The casual cruelty of people who thought they were being kind. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Rourke nodded. "Do you actually believe it? What the doctor said about me?" He looked at her, really looked. "Does it matter what I believe?" "Maybe." "Then no. I don't believe it. I think doctors don't know half of what they claim to know, and small-town doctors know even less. I think people believe what's convenient to believe, and it was convenient for your family to believe you were damaged goods." The bluntness should have hurt. Instead, it felt like relief. "Thank you," Allara said. "For what?" "Saying it straight. Everyone else tiptoed around it like I was made of glass." "You're not glass. You're here, doing work that would break most people. Glass would have shattered weeks ago." It wasn't a compliment exactly, but coming from Rourke, it felt like one. The storm raged for 4 more days. They fell into rhythms, work in the morning, maintenance in the afternoon, quiet evenings by the fire. Sometimes Allara read aloud from Sarah's books. Rourke never asked her to, but he never asked her to stop either. On the 7th day, the wind finally died. They dug out in silence, clearing paths, checking for damage. 2 chickens hadn't made it. 1 section of fence was down, but overall, they'd survived. "You did good," Rourke said as they surveyed the property. "Better than I expected." "You expected me to fail?" "Expected you to break." "Different thing." He started toward the barn. "But you're tougher than you look." Allara watched him go, feeling something shift in her chest. Not attraction, not yet, but recognition maybe. The sense that she'd found someone who understood what it meant to survive something that should have destroyed you. January came hard and stayed late. Allara learned the rhythms of the ranch, the patterns of the cattle, the quirks of individual chickens, the way the weather changed in the mountains. She learned to read Rourke's silences, the difference between thoughtful quiet and the black moods that sent him outside to split wood for hours. She learned to cook properly, to mend clothes, to set a broken fence post, to deliver a calf when the mother struggled. Her hands grew calloused, her body grew strong. The woman who'd arrived in November, soft, scared, uncertain, started to feel like someone else entirely. And slowly, carefully, they started to talk. Not about important things. Not at first, just talk. About the weather, the work, the price of cattle. About books and whether Whitman was overrated. Rourke said yes. Allara disagreed. About coffee and whether it was acceptable to drink it black. Rourke insisted. Allara added sugar when he wasn't looking. Small things. Normal things. Things that felt almost like friendship. One night in late January, after a particularly long day, Rourke poured them both whiskey. To surviving another month, he said, raising his glass. Allara raised hers. To not dying of work. They drank. The whiskey burned. Can I ask you something? Rourke said after a moment. Fair's fair. You ever regret staying? Allara thought about it, really thought. Sometimes, she admitted. When my hands are bleeding, or I'm shin-deep in snow, or I haven't spoken to another soul in weeks. But then I remember what going back would mean. And no, I don't regret it. What would going back mean? Being worthless again. Being the daughter no one wanted. Living in a place where everyone knows exactly what I am and exactly what I'll never have. She stared into the fire. Here, I'm just me. Working. Surviving. That's all. Rourke nodded slowly. Yeah, I know that feeling. Do you ever regret it, staying here after she died? Every day. He poured another finger of whiskey. But I regret the alternative more. Out there I'd have to be someone's neighbor, someone's friend, someone who's moved on. Here, I can just be a man who lost someone and doesn't know how to get past it. Maybe you're not supposed to get past it, Allara said quietly. Maybe you just learn to carry it. Rourke looked at her then, really looked. Something passed between them, understanding, maybe, or recognition. Yeah, he said finally. Maybe that's exactly it. The fire crackled. Outside, wolves howled in the distance. Inside, two people who'd learned to survive sat in comfortable silence, and for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt entirely alone. February was coming, and with it, changes neither of them could predict. But for now, this was enough. The work, the quiet, the slow, careful building of something that wasn't quite trust but was getting close. It was enough. February arrived with deceptive calm. The snow eased up, temperatures rose just enough to make the work slightly less brutal, and for almost 2 weeks, life on the mountain settled into something that felt almost peaceful. Allara had stopped counting the days. Time moved differently here, measured not in dates but in tasks completed, storms weathered, small victories won. She could split a cord of wood without her arms giving out, could tell which cow was which from 50 yards, could make biscuits that Rourke actually complimented, though his version of a compliment was usually just eating 4 of them and grunting. They developed a language of their own. Not many words. Neither of them was much for talking, but an understanding. She knew when he needed space, and he knew when her silence meant she was thinking versus when it meant something was wrong. They worked side by side most days, efficient and synchronized in a way that surprised them both. It should have stayed that way, should have been enough. But the human heart has a way of complicating simple things. Allara first noticed the shift on a morning in mid-February. She was collecting eggs, and Rourke was repairing the barn door that had warped in the cold. He'd taken off his coat despite the chill, working in just his shirt, and when he reached up to test the hinge, she found herself watching the way his shoulders moved. She looked away quickly, annoyed with herself. This wasn't what she was here for. This wasn't what either of them needed, but the thought had been planted. And thoughts like that had roots. That evening, as they sat by the fire, him reading, her mending a torn work shirt, she caught herself studying his face in the lamplight. The gray in his hair that made him look older than he probably was. The scar above his left eyebrow that she'd never asked about. The way he held his book carefully, like it was something precious. "You're staring," he said without looking up. Allara felt heat rise in her face. "Was just thinking." "About what?" "Nothing important." Rourke closed his book, marked the page. "We've been living together for 3 months. I can tell when you're chewing on something." She set down the shirt. "Might as well be honest. Do you ever get lonely? I mean really lonely, not just alone." He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, sometimes." "What do you do about it?" "Work until I'm too tired to think about it. Usually helps." He paused. "Why?" Allara shrugged, trying to seem casual. "Just wondering, being up here, no one else around, seems like it would get to a person." "It does. That's why most people leave." Rourke leaned back in his chair. "You thinking about leaving?" "No, that's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" She didn't have a good answer for that. Or rather, she had an answer she wasn't ready to say out loud. So she picked up the shirt again and went back to mending, feeling his eyes on her for a long moment before he returned to his book. The tension built slowly after that. Not the bad kind. Not anger or resentment. Something else. Something that made the cabin feel smaller, the silence between them heavier with unspoken things. Allara found excuses to stand closer when they worked. Rourke's hand would brush hers when they both reached for something, and neither of them would acknowledge it, but neither would pull away quickly either. It was dangerous. She knew it was dangerous. This was supposed to be simple. Work for shelter, nothing more. Adding feelings into it would complicate everything, and complications up here could be deadly. But knowing something and stopping it were different things entirely. The shift happened on a Thursday, though Allara only knew it was Thursday because she'd been keeping count in a small notebook. Rourke had taught her to check the cattle's hooves for stones and abscesses, and she was working on a particularly stubborn heifer when she slipped. Her foot went out from under her on the icy ground. She went down hard, and the heifer, spooked, kicked out. The hoof caught Alara's shoulder, spinning her around and slamming her into the fence. Pain exploded through her arm. The world tilted. Rourke was there in seconds, pulling her away from the panicked animal, his hand surprisingly gentle as he checked her over. "Where does it hurt?" His voice was tight, controlled. "Shoulder, and my head. I think I hit—" "Don't move." He ran his fingers carefully over her skull, checking for blood, for breaks. His face was close to hers, close enough that she could see the worry in his eyes, quickly masked. "I'm fine," she tried. "You're not fine. You're bleeding." He pulled back and she saw red on his fingers. "Can you stand?" With his help, she managed it. Her shoulder screamed and her vision swam, but she stayed upright. Rourke half carried her back to the cabin. Once inside, he sat her down at the table and got the medical kit, a wooden box Sarah had apparently insisted on keeping well stocked. "This is going to hurt," he warned, and then he started cleaning the gash on the back of her head. He was right. It hurt like hell. Allara bit down on her lip to keep from crying out. "You can yell if you need to," Rourke said. "No one here to judge you for it." "I'm fine." "You keep saying that. Doesn't make it true." He worked efficiently, cleaning the wound, applying some kind of salve that stung. "Probably needs stitches." "Can you do it?" "Yeah, but I meant what I said. This is going to hurt." It did. Rourke's hands were steady, his stitches neat, but every pull of the needle made Alara's vision white out. She gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles went pale. "Almost done," he murmured. "You're doing good." When he finally tied off the last stitch, Alara's whole body was shaking. Not from the pain, well, not just from the pain, from the adrenaline crash, from the fear she hadn't let herself feel while it was happening. "Hey!" Rourke's hand was on her uninjured shoulder. "You're okay. It's over." She nodded, not trusting her voice. He moved to check her shoulder, gently probing the joint. "Can you lift your arm?" She tried. The pain made her gasp. "Probably not broken, but it's going to bruise like hell. You need to rest it for a few days." "I can still work." "Allara." He said her name firmly, making her look at him. "You're hurt. You need to rest. The ranch won't fall apart if you take 2 days. You work when you're hurt." "That's different." "How?" "Because I'm an idiot who doesn't know better. You, on the other hand, should be smarter than me." Despite everything, Allara almost smiled. "That's a low bar." "Yeah, well." Something softened in his expression. Just rest, okay? Let me handle things for a bit. She wanted to argue, but the truth was, she felt like she'd been trampled by a horse. Her head was pounding, her shoulder throbbed, and exhaustion was pulling at her like an undertow. Rourke helped her upstairs, his arm around her waist, taking most of her weight. At her door, he hesitated. You need anything? You call. I'll hear you. I know. He turned to go, then stopped. Allara? Yeah? You scared me when I saw you go down. He didn't look at her when he said it. Don't do that again. Before she could respond, he was gone, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Allara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. The pain in her shoulder was nothing compared to the ache that was opening up somewhere else entirely. This was a problem. A serious problem. Because she was starting to care about Caleb Ror in ways that went well beyond gratitude or respect. And from the look on his face when he'd found her hurt, from the careful way he'd tended her wounds, from the confession he'd made before leaving, he might be starting to care about her too. The smart thing would be to shut it down, to rebuild the walls, keep things professional, remember why she was here in the first place. But Allara had learned something in her months on the mountain. Smart didn't always mean right, and safe didn't always mean worth having. She fell asleep still turning it over in her mind, and dreamed of hands that could be gentle even when they were scarred, and eyes that looked gray as winter but warmed when they looked at her. The next 2 days, Rourke was everywhere and nowhere. He brought her meals, checked her bandages, made sure she wasn't pushing herself too hard. But he was also distant, careful not to get too close, not to let moments linger. Allara understood. He was protecting them both. It didn't make it hurt any less. On the third day, she couldn't stand it anymore. Her shoulder still ached, but she could move it without wanting to scream, and staying in bed was making her crazy. She came downstairs to find Rourke at the table, working through a stack of papers, accounts by the look of it. You're supposed to be resting, he said without looking up. I've rested enough. Allara poured herself coffee, sat down across from him. What are you doing? Planning. Spring's coming, and with it, decisions. What kind of decisions? He set down his pencil. Whether to expand the herd, whether to try planting again. Sarah had a vegetable garden, but I let it go after she died. Whether to hire help for the summer. You mean more help in addition to me? Yeah. He met her eyes. Assuming you're planning to stay that long. Are you asking me to leave? No, I'm asking if you want to. Allara thought about it. 3 months ago, she would have said yes without hesitation. This place had been a refuge, nothing more. Somewhere to survive until she figured out what came next. But now? I don't have anywhere else to go, she said carefully. Millbrook's not an option, and I don't have money for anywhere else. I'd pay you, Rourke said, for the work you've done. Fair wages, enough to get you started somewhere. Is that what you want, for me to go? The question hung between them. I don't know what I want, Rourke admitted finally. This was supposed to be simple. You work, I pay you, we both get what we need, but it's getting complicated. Complicated how? You know how. Alara's heart was beating too fast. Maybe I want to hear you say it. Rourke leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. I'm trying to do the right thing here. Which is what? Pushing me away before anything can happen? Yes, exactly that. He stood up, started pacing. You're 23 years old, you've been through hell. You don't need some broken widower twice your age confusing things even more. I'm 24, and you're not twice my age. You're 36. I asked Marcus before I left. Allara stood too, wincing as her shoulder protested. And I'm not some fragile thing that needs protecting from her own decisions. I know that, but what? You feel something and it scares you, so you're going to push it away and pretend it's for my own good. Rourke stopped pacing. It is for your own good. Don't I get a say in that? Allara, I spent my whole life with people making decisions for me. What I was worth, who I could marry, where I could go. I'm not doing that anymore. She crossed her arms, immediately regretted it as pain shot through her shoulder. You want me to leave? Say so. But don't make it about protecting me. That's just cowardice dressed up as nobility. The words came out harsher than she'd intended. Rourke's face went hard. You don't know what you're talking about. Then explain it to me. I already lost someone I loved. I can't. He stopped, turned away. I can't do it again. And there it was, the truth under all the careful distance. Allara's anger drained away. She walked over to him slowly, giving him time to move if he wanted. He didn't. I'm not Sarah, she said quietly. I know. And I'm not asking you to forget her. I know that too. His voice was rough. But letting you in means risking losing you, and I'm not sure I can survive that twice. So what's the alternative? Keep me at arm's length forever? Pretend we're just employer and employee when we both know it stopped being that weeks ago? Rourke finally turned to face her. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. I don't know. I don't have an answer. Then maybe we figure it out together, instead of you deciding what's best for both of us. They stood there, close enough to touch but not touching, the space between them charged with everything they weren't saying. This is a bad idea, Rourke said. Probably. It's going to complicate everything. Definitely. We could both end up hurt. Yeah, we could. Allara took a breath. But we could also end up something else. Something better than alone. Rourke's hand came up, hesitated, then gently cupped her face. His thumb brushed her cheek, careful of the bruise that was still fading there. You're sure about this? He asked. No, but I'm sure I want to try. He kissed her then. Soft at first, tentative, like he was afraid she might break. But when she leaned into him, when her good arm came up around his neck, something shifted. The kiss deepened, became something desperate and real and absolutely terrifying in its intensity. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Rourke rested his forehead against hers. We're going to screw this up, he muttered. Without question, Allara agreed, but we're doing it anyway. Looks like it, and despite everything, the fear, the complications, the absolute certainty that this would be messy and difficult and possibly a disaster, Allara felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. Hope. The rest of February passed in a blur. They didn't talk about what had changed between them, didn't need to. It was there in the small things, the way Rourke's hand would find hers when they walked back from checking the cattle, the way Allara would lean against him while they sat by the fire, his arm around her shoulders, the way they'd stay up late talking about everything and nothing, unwilling to let the day end. There was still work. There was always work. But it felt different now. Shared instead of parallel. They were building something together, and they both knew it, even if neither of them said it out loud. March roared in with wind that rattled the shutters and temperatures that dropped back below freezing. The brief warmth of late February vanished like it had never been. Storm coming, Rourke said one morning, studying the sky. Big one. We've got maybe 24 hours to prepare. They'd been through storms before, but something about his tone made Allara nervous. How big? Bad enough that I'm worried. He turned to her. We need to move fast. Everything that can be secured needs to be secured. Everything that can be brought in needs to come in. And we need to make sure we have enough supplies to last a week at minimum. They worked through the day without stopping. Firewood, food, water, medical supplies. The cattle were moved to the most sheltered pasture. The chickens were locked down tight. Every shutter was checked and double-checked. By nightfall, Allara was exhausted, but they weren't done. The north fence line, Rourke said, pulling on his heaviest coat. I need to check it. If it goes down in the storm, we'll lose cattle. I'll come with you. No. You stay here, keep the fire going, keep the coffee hot. I'll be back in an hour. Caleb, please. He kissed her forehead. I need to know you're safe and warm. Let me have that. So she stayed, paced the cabin, watched the sky grow darker, felt the temperature drop. An hour passed, then 2. The wind picked up, howling around the cabin like something alive and hungry. 3 hours. 4. The snow started, not flurries, but thick, heavy flakes that cut visibility to nothing. Allara stood at the window, fear building in her chest. Something was wrong. He should have been back by now. She pulled on her coat, grabbed a lantern, and headed out into the storm. The cold hit her like a wall. The wind tried to tear the lantern from her hand. Snow stung her face, blinding her, but she pushed forward, following the path toward the north pasture. Caleb! Her voice was swallowed by the wind. She kept walking, calling, straining to see anything in the white chaos. Her feet went numb. Her face went numb. Fear turned to terror. Then she saw it. A dark shape on the ground ahead. Rourke was lying in the snow, conscious but barely, blood on his temple, his leg at a wrong angle. Fell, he managed. Legs broken. Couldn't get back. Allara dropped to her knees beside him. How long have you been here? Don't know. Hour, maybe? An hour in this cold. That was bad. That was potentially fatal. We need to get you back. She tried to help him up, but he cried out when his leg moved. Can't walk. You need to go get help. There is no help. The nearest neighbor is 10 miles away and no one's coming out in this. Allara's mind raced. I'm getting you back to the cabin. Allara, you can't carry me. I'm not leaving you here to freeze to death. She stood up, assessed the situation. He was right. She couldn't carry him. But maybe she could drag him. She took off her coat, laid it on the snow. Roll on to this. You'll freeze without your coat. And you'll die if I don't get you inside. Now roll, damn it! He did, gritting his teeth against the pain. Allara grabbed the coat's collar and started pulling. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done. Harder than any day of work, any task Rourke had set her. Every step was agony. Her muscles screamed. The wind fought her. The snow tried to bury them both. But she didn't stop. Step by step, foot by foot, she dragged him toward the cabin. When she couldn't see anymore, she followed the fence line by feel. When her hands went numb, she kept going anyway. It took an eternity. Multiple eternities, time stopped meaning anything except the next step, the next pull, the next impossible yard gained. And then, impossibly, they were at the cabin door. Allara got him inside, next to the fire. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely close the door, but she managed it. Then she collapsed next to him, both of them breathing hard. You're insane, Rourke gasped. That was the stupidest, most reckless... Save it. Allara forced herself up. We need to deal with your leg. She'd watched him set a calf's broken leg once, hoped the principle was the same. She found straight boards, torn sheets for binding, gave him whiskey and a leather strap to bite down on. This is going to hurt, she said. Everything hurts. But he took the strap. Setting the bone was brutal. Rourke's scream, even muffled, made Allara's stomach turn. But she kept going, pulling, aligning, splinting. When it was done, they were both covered in sweat despite the cold. Where did you learn that? Rourke asked when he could speak again. I didn't. I just did what seemed right. Allara sat back, suddenly aware of how close she'd come to losing him. Don't ever do that again. Which part? Breaking my leg or scaring you? Either. Both. She wiped her eyes, annoyed to find them wet. I can't lose you, Caleb. I know that's selfish. I know it complicates things even more, but I can't. He reached for her hand, squeezed it. You won't. I'm too stubborn to die. You almost just did, but I didn't, because you're too stubborn to let me. He pulled her down beside him. We're a pair, aren't we? Apparently. They lay there by the fire as the storm raged outside. Rourke's leg would take weeks to heal properly. The work would fall entirely on Allara. The spring plans would have to change, but they were alive, together, and somehow that was enough. The storm lasted 6 days. 6 days of Allara doing everything herself, learning in brutal fast-forward what it meant to keep the ranch running solo. 6 days of Rourke instructing from the floor, frustrated and in pain but trying to help however he could. 6 days of them learning to rely on each other in ways that went deeper than either had expected. When the storm finally broke, the world outside was transformed. 3 feet of new snow, drifts up to the windows, a silence so complete it felt holy. Allara stood at the door, looking out at the devastation and beauty, feeling something shift inside her. She'd saved his life, and in doing so, had proven something to herself. She wasn't broken, wasn't worthless, wasn't the burden her family had made her believe she was. She was strong, capable, enough. And when she turned back to look at Rourke, sitting by the fire with his splinted leg, watching her with something that looked a lot like love, she realized something else. She was home. The weeks that followed the storm were harder than anything Allara had faced yet. With Rourke's leg immobilized, every task fell to her. The cattle still needed feeding, the chickens still demanded attention, the firewood still had to be split. Her body adapted out of necessity, muscles building in places she didn't know she had muscles, hands developing new calluses on top of old ones. Rourke hated every minute of his helplessness. She could see it eating at him, The way he'd clench his jaw when she came in exhausted. The way he'd try to stand and do things himself only to collapse back down, cursing. "I should be helping you," he said one evening as she dragged herself inside after a particularly brutal day. She'd had to break ice on the water trough 3 times, and one of the cows had decided to wander off, leading to an hour-long search in knee-deep snow. "You are helping me. You're telling me what needs doing." Allara collapsed into a chair, too tired to even remove her boots. "That's not the same as actually doing it." "No, but it's what we've got." She leaned back, closed her eyes. "How long before you can walk again?" "Doc said 6 weeks minimum. We're at 3. 3 more weeks." Allara tried not to think about it. Tried not to think about how much harder everything would be when the calving season started in earnest, or when the spring thaw turned everything to mud. "Hey," Rourke's voice was gentler. "Come here." She opened her eyes. He was patting the floor beside him, where he'd been sleeping since the stairs were impossible with his leg. She should have said no, should have gone upstairs to her own bed, but exhaustion made her honest. She wanted to be close to him. Allara lowered herself down beside him, careful of his splinted leg. His arm came around her shoulders, and she let herself lean into his warmth. "You're doing more than I ever expected," he said quietly. "More than anyone could expect. Don't have much choice." "There's always a choice. You could have left. Could still leave. Wait out the rest of winter in Silverdale, come back when it's easier. And leave you here alone with a broken leg? That's not a choice, that's just abandonment." His hand moved to her hair, fingers running through the tangled mess of it. She'd stopped bothering to braid it properly weeks ago. "Why do you stay, Allara? Really?" She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, wind rattled the shutters. The fire crackled. "Because this is the first place I've ever felt like I mattered. Not for what I could give someone, not for what I was supposed to be. Just for me. For the work I do and the person I am." She paused. "And because of you. I'm not worth staying for." "That's not your decision to make." Rourke pulled her closer. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway." He laughed then, a real laugh, and kissed the top of her head. They sat like that until the fire burned low, neither wanting to break the moment, both knowing that these quiet spaces were what kept them going through everything else. When Allara finally climbed the stairs to her room, she found herself thinking about the future for the first time in months. Not planning, exactly. That felt too presumptuous. But wondering. What would happen when Rourke's leg healed? When spring came properly? When the isolation of winter gave way to the possibility of the outside world creeping back in? She fell asleep without answers, but for once, the not knowing didn't terrify her. April arrived with mud and chaos. The snow melted fast, turning the paths to soup, making every trip to the barn an exercise in not falling. Rourke's leg had healed enough that he could walk with a crutch, though Allara still did most of the heavy work. The calving season started in earnest, and with it came a new kind of exhaustion. Nights spent in the barn, helping cows through difficult births. Days spent checking the newborns, making sure they were nursing, watching for signs of illness. Allara learned by doing, making mistakes that Rourke would correct without judgment, slowly building a knowledge base she'd never expected to have. One night, after a particularly difficult birth that had taken 4 hours and left them both covered in blood and fluids, they sat on hay bales in the barn, too tired to make it back to the cabin yet. "You ever think about having kids?" Rourke asked suddenly. The question caught Allara off guard. She'd been carefully not thinking about it, pushing away the old diagnosis, the old shame. "I can't, remember? I remember what some doctors said. Doesn't mean it's true." "Caleb, I'm serious. You were what, 18 when he examined you? These small-town doctors, half of them don't know what they're doing. They see a young woman who hasn't conceived yet and declare her barren because it's easier than admitting they don't know." Allara stared at him. "Why are you bringing this up?" He met her eyes. "Because I need you to know something. If that doctor was right, if you can't have children, I don't care. It doesn't change how I feel about you. It doesn't change what I want." "And what do you want?" "You, here, with me, however that looks." The words should have been romantic, should have made her heart soar. Instead, they brought up a wave of fear so intense it made her nauseous. "What if I want it to be true?" she said quietly. What if part of me hopes I can't have children because then at least the doctor was right, and I'm not just fundamentally broken in some other way? Rourke was quiet for a moment. You're not broken, Allara. You don't know that. I do know it. I've watched you for months. I've seen you handle things that would destroy most people. You're the strongest person I know. Strength doesn't mean wholeness. No, but neither does bearing children. He shifted on the hay bale, wincing as his healing leg protested. Sarah and I tried for 3 years. She never got pregnant. And you know what? We were happy anyway. We had each other. We had this place. We had a life. The rest was just details. Allara felt something crack open in her chest. Did you ever resent her for it? Never. Not once. He reached for her hand. And I'll never resent you either. Whatever happens, whatever we can or can't have, we'll figure it out together. She wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it physically hurt, but years of being told she was worthless had dug deep roots. I'm scared, she admitted. I'm scared that one day you'll wake up and realize you could have had someone better, someone whole, someone who could give you— Stop. His hand cupped her face, making her look at him. You are not a collection of things you can give me. You're a person, and you're the person I want. End of discussion. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. Everything else is just noise. He leaned forward, kissed her gently. I love you, Allara. Figured I should probably say that out loud. The words hung in the air between them, huge and terrifying and absolutely real. You don't have to say it back, Rourke continued. I know it's complicated. I know there's a lot to work through, but I needed you to know. Alara's throat was tight. I love you too. I think I have for a while. I was just too afraid to admit it. Afraid of what? That it wouldn't be real, that it was just proximity and convenience and two lonely people settling for each other. Is that what you think this is? No. The word came out firm, certain. No, I don't think that anymore. They kissed again, deeper this time, hands tangling in each other's hair, months of tension and fear and want finally finding release. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Rourke grinned. We should probably get back to the cabin, he said. Probably. Neither of them moved. Eventually they did make it back, stumbling through the dark, laughing like idiots, feeling lighter than either had in years. That night, Allara didn't sleep in her own room, and the walls that had kept them carefully separate finally came down completely. The next few weeks were the happiest Allara could remember. Spring was brutal. The work never stopped. The challenges never eased. But they faced it together now, truly together, and that made all the difference. Rourke's leg healed enough that he could work properly again, and the relief of not carrying everything alone made Allara almost giddy. They talked about the future in concrete terms now, about expanding the herd, about planting Sarah's garden again, about building a second room onto the cabin. Small plans, practical plans, but underneath them was a foundation that felt solid for the first time in Allara's life. She should have known it couldn't last. Should have known that the past had a way of reaching forward when you least expected it. Late May brought the first real heat of the year, and with it, Allara woke up violently sick. She barely made it outside before her stomach emptied itself. When she came back in, pale and shaking, Rourke was already up. You all right? Something I ate, maybe? But even as she said it, she felt the nausea building again. It continued for 3 days. Every morning, the same sickness, the same need to vomit, until there was nothing left. By the 4th day, when Allara realized her monthly bleeding was late, very late, a different kind of fear set in. She counted back, tried to remember when she'd last bled. 6 weeks? 7? The work had been so consuming, she honestly couldn't remember. That evening, she waited until they were alone in the cabin, dinner finished, the world quiet around them. Caleb, I need to tell you something. He looked up from the harness he was mending. Something in her tone made him set it down. What's wrong? I think— She took a breath. I think I might be pregnant. The words fell into the space between them like stones into still water. Rourke's face went through several expressions: surprise, confusion, something that might have been hope. You're sure? Not sure, but the signs are there. The sickness, the timing, everything. How do you feel about it? Trust him to ask that instead of celebrating immediately. Allara sat down, trying to organize her thoughts. Terrified, confused, like maybe I'm wrong and this is just wishful thinking or food poisoning or something else entirely. And if you're not wrong, then everything I was told about myself was a lie. Everything my father believed, everything that town condemned me for, all of it was just wrong. Her voice cracked. Do you know how angry that makes me? How many years I spent believing I was broken? How much I internalized that shame? Rourke moved to sit beside her. You have every right to be angry. I want to go back there, to Millbrook. I want to stand in front of everyone who cast me aside and show them they were wrong. We can do that. No? Allara shook her head. I need to do this myself. I need to face them, especially my father, and make them see what they did. Allara, if you're pregnant, traveling that far isn't, I'm not an invalid. Women work through pregnancies all the time. I've been working through this one for weeks without even knowing it. That's different from riding 20 miles to confront people who treated you like garbage. She turned to face him fully. I need this. I need to look my father in the eye and show him he was wrong about me. That he sold something valuable for nothing because he was too ignorant to see it. Rourke was quiet for a long moment. You want me to come with you? No, this is something I have to do alone. You understand that, don't you? He nodded slowly. Yeah, I do. Doesn't mean I like it. I'll be fine. It's 1 day there, 1 day back, 2 days in town at most. When? Soon. Before I start showing, before they can dismiss it as someone else's child. The plan solidified over the next few days. Allara would ride to Millbrook, stay 1 night at the boarding house, confront the people who needed confronting, and ride back. Rourke hated it. She could tell, but he didn't try to stop her. He understood the need for this kind of closure. The morning she left, he helped her saddle the horse, checked the supplies she was carrying 3 times, and made her promise to turn back if anything felt wrong. I'll be fine, she assured him for the 10th time. I know. Doesn't stop me worrying. He kissed her, long and deep. You come back to me. Understand? Always. She rode out as the sun was coming up, leaving him standing in front of the cabin, and tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong. The journey to Millbrook took most of the day. The landscape shifted from mountain to foothills to the flatlands she remembered from childhood. With every mile, Allara felt her resolve hardening. She'd left here broken and desperate. She was returning strong and furious. She arrived in town just as the sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Millbrook looked exactly the same. The same church steeple, the same general store, the same houses lining the main street, as if no time had passed at all. But everything had changed. She had changed. Allara stabled her horse and checked into the boarding house. The woman at the desk didn't recognize her, which was fine. She wasn't ready to be recognized yet. That night, lying in an unfamiliar bed in a town that had once been home, Allara placed her hand on her still flat stomach and made a silent promise. Tomorrow, she would tell the truth, and whatever happened after, she would face it without shame. Morning came clear and cold. Allara dressed carefully, braided her hair, and walked to the one place she knew her father would be on a Sunday morning, the town square, where the farmers gathered before church. He was there, older than she remembered, grayer, talking to a group of men about crop prices, his voice carrying across the square. Marcus was with him, looking uncomfortable in a too-tight collar. Allara walked straight up to them. Her father saw her first. His face went white, then red. Allara, what are you... Hello, father. Her voice came out steady, calm. I thought it was time we had a conversation. This isn't the place. This is exactly the place. You sold me here in this town, with these people watching. Seems fitting I reclaim myself here too. A crowd was gathering. Allara could see familiar faces, neighbors, former friends, people who'd watched her leave without a word of protest. You have no right to come back here and what? Embarrass you? Make you face what you did? Allara stepped closer. You told everyone I was barren. You let Dr. Brennan's diagnosis define my entire worth. You sold me to a stranger for $18. You were a burden. You couldn't work, couldn't marry. What were we supposed to... I'm pregnant. The words rang out across the square. Silence fell like a hammer. Allara continued, her voice clear and strong. I'm pregnant, which means Dr. Brennan was either incompetent or lying. which means you gave up your daughter based on nothing more than one man's word and your own unwillingness to support me." Her father's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. "Where is Dr. Brennan?" Allara asked the crowd. "I'd like him to explain how he diagnosed me as barren when clearly I'm not." "He left town," someone called out. "C'était 6 months back, moved west." "How convenient." Allara turned back to her father. "Did you know? Did you know he was wrong?" We had no way of—" "You had every way. You chose not to look because it was easier to believe I was worthless." She could feel tears threatening, but refused to let them fall. "I came back here to tell you something. I'm not broken. I never was. But you are. You're a man who valued money over his own daughter, and you'll have to live with that." Marcus stepped forward. "Allara, we didn't know. If we had known, you would have done exactly the same thing, because it wasn't about whether I could have children. It was about whether I was convenient." She turned to address the whole crowd now, all these people who'd watched her leave without protest. "I want you all to know something. The man who took me in, Caleb Ror, he treated me with more dignity in one day than this entire town showed me in 20 years. He saw me as a person, not a commodity. He gave me work and respect and the space to become who I was meant to be." "Now, Allara," Mrs. Patterson from the general store spoke up, her voice dripping with false concern. "You have to understand, we all thought we were doing what was best." "No, you did what was easy. There's a difference." Alara's hands were shaking, but her voice stayed firm. "How many other women in this town have been told they're worthless because of what they can't do? How many daughters and wives and mothers have been judged by one man's opinion and found lacking?" She could see it in their faces, the discomfort, the recognition. This wasn't just about her. It was about every woman who'd ever been reduced to her biology, her usefulness, her ability to produce. "You want to make this right?" Allara asked. "Start questioning the men who make these declarations. Start valuing women for more than their wombs. Start treating your daughters like people instead of property." She turned back to her father one last time. "I don't forgive you. I don't know if I ever will. But I wanted you to see what you gave away. I wanted you to know that I survived without you, that I became someone worth being without your approval or support." Then she walked away through the silent crowd, back to the boarding house. Behind her, she could hear the murmurs starting, the conversations that would spread through the town like wildfire. She'd done what she came to do. The rest was up to them. That night, lying in bed, Allara felt the enormousness of what she'd done settle over her. She'd confronted her past, spoken her truth, refused to be diminished. And tomorrow, she would ride back to the mountain, back to Caleb, back to the life they were building together. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, Marcus stood there, hat in his hands. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. Allara considered refusing, but something in his face made her step aside. He came in, stayed standing near the door. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it. For not standing up for you, for taking the easy way, for letting Pa make all the decisions." "Why didn't you?" "Because I was scared, and young, and stupid." Marcus twisted his hat. "But that's not an excuse. You were my sister. I should have protected you." "Yes, you should have. I know I can't fix it, can't take back what happened. But I wanted you to know, what you said today, it mattered. People are talking, really talking, about Dr. Brennan, about how women get treated, about all of it." "Good, they should be," Marcus nodded. "You happy with this Rourke fellow?" Despite everything, Allara smiled. "Yeah, I am. That's good. That's really good." He moved toward the door, then stopped. "If you ever need anything, if he ever treats you wrong, you send word and I'll come. I know I don't deserve another chance, but if you ever need help, I'll be there." "Thank you, Marcus." After he left, Allara sat by the window and watched the town settle into night. She'd come here for closure, for vindication, for the satisfaction of proving them wrong. She'd gotten all of that. But more importantly, she'd gotten something else. The absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. That the mountain, the work, the man waiting for her there, that was her real life. This place was just the past. And the past couldn't hurt her anymore. She rode out at dawn, eager to get back. The journey seemed shorter somehow, time compressed by anticipation. When she finally saw the cabin, saw Caleb waiting on the porch, something in her chest expanded. He met her halfway, helped her down from the horse, pulled her into his arms. "How did it go?" he asked. "I'll tell you everything, but first," she leaned back to look at him. "I'm ready to stop running from the past. I'm ready to just be here, with you, building whatever comes next." Caleb kissed her forehead. "Then let's do that. Let's build something that's just ours." They walked back to the cabin together as the sun climbed higher, and Allara felt the last pieces of her old life fall away. Whatever came next, the pregnancy, the future, the uncertainty of it all, she would face it here, with him, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The story of what happened in Millbrook spread faster than Allara had anticipated. Within 2 weeks, a woman from Silverdale showed up at their property, riding a tired mare and carrying a letter of introduction from the boarding house owner. Her name was Catherine Wells, and she was maybe 40, with iron gray hair and the kind of face that had seen too much to be easily impressed. She sat at their kitchen table, accepting coffee but declining food, and got straight to the point. "Word's gotten around about what you did, what you said." Catherine's eyes were sharp, assessing. "There are women in 3 counties talking about it, about Dr. Brennan, about how many diagnoses he gave that might have been wrong." Allara exchanged a glance with Caleb. He was standing by the stove, arms crossed, watching the stranger with careful attention. "I just told the truth," Allara said. "The truth has a way of being dangerous to the right people." Catherine set down her cup. "Dr. Brennan wasn't just incompetent, he was corrupt. There's evidence he was taking money from families to declare their daughters barren, making them unmarriageable so the families could keep dowries, or ensuring certain men didn't have to honor marriage contracts." The words hit Allara like a physical blow. "What?" "Your father paid him $50, according to the ledger we found. Brennan kept records of everything, the fool. Thought he was being clever." Caleb's voice was tight with controlled rage. "You're saying Vance paid to have his own daughter declared worthless?" "That's exactly what I'm saying, and he wasn't the only father who did it. We've found at least a dozen similar transactions over the past 5 years." Allara felt the room tilt. Her father hadn't just believed the diagnosis. He'd paid for it, had actively chosen to destroy her future for money. "Why?" Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "Your mother's medical bills, from what we can piece together. She was sick for nearly a year before she died. The treatments cost more than your father had. He was drowning in debt. A barren daughter was a liability he couldn't afford. But a daughter he could sell off for labor? That was an asset." The clinical way Catherine laid it out made it somehow worse. This hadn't been a desperate mistake or a misguided attempt to help. It had been calculated, planned. A business decision where Allara herself was the commodity being manipulated. Caleb moved to stand behind her chair, his hand on her shoulder. The weight of it grounded her, kept her from flying apart. "Why are you telling me this?" Allara asked. "Because women are angry, really angry, and they're organizing." Catherine leaned forward. "We're putting together a case against Brennan wherever he ran off to. We're also documenting every woman who was given a false diagnosis, everyone who was hurt by this. But we need you to testify. Your case is the most visible, the most recent. You're the one who came back pregnant, proving he was wrong." "Testify where? To who?" "We're petitioning the territorial court. It's a long shot, but if we can get enough evidence, enough voices, we might actually be able to do something, change laws, hold these men accountable, protect future daughters from the same fate." Allara looked up at Caleb. His face was grim, but when he met her eyes, he nodded slightly. "Your choice." "What would testifying involve?" she asked. "Traveling to the territorial capital. Could take weeks. You'd have to tell your story in front of judges, lawyers, possibly a crowd. It won't be easy." "I'm 6 months pregnant." "I know. That's part of why your testimony would be so powerful. Living proof that Brennan was wrong." Catherine's expression softened slightly. "I won't lie to you. This will be hard. They'll question everything. Your character, your morals, your relationship with Mr. Rourke. They'll try to discredit you in every way possible." "Let them try," Allara said, her voice hardening. "I survived being sold like cattle. I survived a winter on this mountain. I survived going back to face the people who threw me away. I can survive some lawyers." Catherine smiled then, genuine and fierce. "I was hoping you'd say that." After Catherine left, Allara and Caleb sat in silence for a long time. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting everything in gold, but the warmth didn't reach the cold fury building in Allara's chest. $50, she said finally. He paid $50 to ruin my life, then sold me for 18. He made a profit on destroying me. Allara, no. Let me be angry. I need to be angry right now. She stood up, started pacing. I knew he didn't love me, knew he saw me as a burden, but I thought it was just neglect, indifference, not this, not active, calculated malice. Caleb let her pace, let her rage. When she finally stopped, breathing hard, he asked quietly, "Are you going to do it?" Testify. Yes. Absolutely yes. She pressed her hands against her stomach, feeling the baby move inside her. Not just for me. For every other woman he did this to. For every daughter who was told she was worthless. It's going to be brutal. Catherine wasn't exaggerating about that. I know. And traveling that far, being pregnant, women have babies in covered wagons while crossing the plains. I think I can handle a coach ride to the capital. She moved to him, took his hands. I need to do this, Caleb. I need to see it through. Then I'm coming with you. You don't have to. I'm coming with you, he repeated, firmer. The ranch can survive a few weeks. You're not doing this alone. Allara felt something tight in her chest loosen. Thank you. They spent the next month preparing. Caleb arranged for a neighbor, a taciturn rancher named Bill Morrison, who lived 10 miles south, to check on the property while they were gone. Allara wrote out detailed instructions for the cattle, the chickens, the garden she'd finally gotten growing. They packed carefully, planning for a journey that might take 6 weeks or more. The night before they'd left, Allara couldn't sleep. She stood at the window, looking out at the mountains silhouetted against the stars, and felt the weight of what she was about to do settling over her. Caleb came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, careful of her swollen belly. Having second thoughts? He asked. No, just first thoughts, second thoughts, third thoughts, all at once. She leaned back against him. What if I'm not enough? What if my story doesn't matter? It matters. You matter. And you're not alone in this. There are dozens of other women ready to speak up. You're just the one brave enough to go first. Or stupid enough. Same thing sometimes. He kissed her temple. Whatever happens, we face it together. Then we come back here and we have this baby and we build the life we want. That's all that really matters. She turned in his arms. I love you. I don't say that enough. You show it every day. That's better than saying it. They made love that night with a tenderness that felt like goodbye and hello all at once. Tomorrow they'd leave the safety of the mountain for the uncertainty of the world beyond. But tonight, they were just two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, holding on while they still could. The journey to the territorial capital took 12 days. The coach was cramped and uncomfortable, the roads were rough, and by day 5, Allara was so tired of being pregnant and jostled that she seriously considered walking the rest of the way. Caleb was patient, getting her whatever she needed, running interference with the other passengers when they stared too long at her condition. They arrived in late August to a city that felt overwhelming after months of mountain isolation. The capital was 10 times the size of Millbrook, with actual paved streets, gas lamps, buildings 3 and 4 stories tall. The noise was constant. Horses, wagons, people shouting, construction, everything layered on top of everything else. Catherine met them at the coaching station with another woman, a lawyer named Margaret Thorne, who looked like she could argue the sun into setting early if she felt like it. Welcome to hell, Margaret said by way of greeting. She was perhaps 50, dressed in severe black with eyes that missed nothing. I'm handling the legal strategy. Catherine's been gathering evidence and witnesses. Between us, we're going to make these men wish they'd never heard the name Brennan. Over the next week, Allara learned exactly what she'd signed up for. Margaret drilled her relentlessly on her testimony, anticipating every possible question, every attack the defense might make. Catherine brought in other women to share their stories. A seamstress who'd been declared barren at 19 and was now mother to 3. A teacher who'd lost her position because of Brennan's diagnosis. A young wife whose husband had abandoned her based on the doctor's word. Each story made Allara angrier. Each woman who'd been hurt made her more determined. The hearing was set for September 1st. 3 judges would preside, hear evidence, and determine whether there was enough cause to bring formal charges against Dr. Brennan and to investigate the broader pattern of corruption. The night before, Allara barely slept. The baby was active, kicking and rolling as if sensing her anxiety. Caleb held her, stroking her hair, not offering empty reassurances but just being present. Morning came too fast. The courtroom was packed. Allara hadn't expected that, hadn't anticipated the rows of women who'd come to watch, to bear witness, to silently support. Catherine had organized them, sent word throughout the territory. The defense attorneys looked visibly shaken at the turnout. Allara was called first. She walked to the witness stand on shaking legs, very aware of how pregnant she was, how visible. Margaret had told her that was good. Let them see the living proof. But it still felt vulnerable, exposed. The judge asked her to state her name for the record. Allara Vance. She paused. Though I go by Allara Rourke now. She saw Caleb's head come up sharply. They hadn't discussed marriage, hadn't had time, hadn't made it official. But in that moment, standing in front of judges and lawyers and a room full of strangers, she claimed it anyway, claimed him, claimed the life they'd built. Margaret walked her through her testimony. How Dr. Brennan had examined her after her mother's death, how he'd declared her barren without extensive testing, how her family had treated her after the diagnosis, how she'd been sold to Caleb for labor. "And you're how far along now?" Margaret asked. 7 months. So Dr. Brennan's diagnosis was incorrect. Obviously. A ripple of laughter went through the courtroom. The judge gavelled for silence. Then came the cross-examination. The defense attorney was a thin man with a sharp face who looked at Allara like she was something dirty. "Miss Vance, Mrs. Rourke," she corrected. "You're not legally married, though, are you?" "Not yet, but I will be as soon as we can arrange it." "I see. So when you became pregnant, you were an unmarried woman living alone with a man not your husband. Is that correct?" Allara felt the trap closing. "I was working as his housekeeper." "And warming his bed, apparently." Margaret shot to her feet. "Your Honor, this line of questioning is irrelevant to—" "I'll allow it," the judge said. "The witness's character is at issue. Answer the question, Mrs. Rourke." Allara met the attorney's eyes directly. "Yes, Caleb and I are together. We love each other. And if you're trying to suggest that makes me a liar or my testimony less valid, then I'd say you're proving exactly why women need protection from men who think they can judge our worth based on their own narrow morality." The courtroom erupted. The judge gavelled again, harder. "Mrs. Rourke, you will answer the questions asked and refrain from editorializing." Then he should ask better questions, more gavel banging. Margaret was trying not to smile. The defense attorney looked furious. "Did you or did you not accept money from Mr. Rourke in exchange for living with him?" "I accepted wages for work performed, same as any employee." "And the other services you provided, were those part of your employment?" Caleb started to stand. Allara caught his eye, shook her head slightly. She could handle this. "I provided housekeeping, animal husbandry, ranch management, and eventually partnership in building a life together. If you're trying to call me a prostitute, just say it directly instead of dancing around it." "Your Honor." "I'm asking," Allara continued, her voice rising, "because I want this court to understand what you're actually doing here. You're trying to discredit me by attacking my character instead of addressing the fact that a doctor took bribes to destroy women's lives. You're suggesting that because I fell in love with a good man and built a life with him outside of traditional marriage, that somehow makes me a liar about being declared barren when I very clearly am not." She gestured to her stomach. "I'm 7 months pregnant. That's not a lie. That's not up for interpretation. That's biological fact." The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Rourke, do you have evidence that Dr. Brennan took bribes specifically related to your case?" "Catherine Wells does. She found his ledger." Catherine stood, brought forward the evidence. The ledger was entered into the record. The pages showing the $50 payment from John Vance to Dr. Brennan, dated 2 days before Allara's examination. The defense attorney tried to argue it could be for anything, legitimate medical services, unrelated care, but Margaret was ready with testimony from Brennan's former assistant, who confirmed that such payments were standard for families wanting daughters declared unmarriageable. The hearing lasted 2 more days. Other women testified. Financial records were presented. A pattern of corruption emerged so clear that even the skeptical judges couldn't ignore it. On the third day, the judges called for a recess to deliberate. The wait was excruciating. Allara sat in a small room with Caleb and Margaret, trying not to think about what would happen if they lost. "We won't lose," Margaret said, reading her expression. "The evidence is too strong. Worst case, they say there's not enough to charge Brennan criminally, but recommend civil penalties. Best case, they issue warrants and start investigating every doctor who might have done the same thing." "And middle case?" Caleb asked. "They acknowledge the problem, but say it's beyond their jurisdiction and kick it up to the territorial legislature, which would actually be good. We need law changes, not just individual prosecutions." 2 hours later, they were called back. The lead judge was a man in his 60s with a face like weathered granite. He looked at the packed courtroom, at the women filling every seat, and something in his expression shifted. "This court has reviewed the evidence presented regarding Dr. Josiah Brennan and the pattern of fraudulent medical diagnoses. We find sufficient cause to issue warrants for Dr. Brennan's arrest on charges of fraud, corruption, and conspiracy. Additionally, we are recommending a full territorial investigation into similar practices by other physicians, and we are forwarding our findings to the legislature with a recommendation for new laws protecting women from such exploitation." The courtroom erupted in cheers. Women were crying, hugging each other. Catherine grabbed Allara in a fierce embrace. Margaret actually smiled. But the judge wasn't finished. He gavelled for silence. "Furthermore, this court wishes to acknowledge the bravery of the women who came forward, particularly Mrs. Rourke, who faced considerable personal attack in order to tell her truth. It is this court's opinion that such courage deserves recognition, not condemnation." He looked directly at Allara then. "Mrs. Rourke, I hope you and your husband have a healthy child, and I hope you know that what you did here will protect countless other daughters from suffering as you did." Allara couldn't speak, could only nod, tears streaming down her face. They left the courthouse to find a crowd waiting. Women who wanted to thank her, to touch her hand, to tell her she'd changed something fundamental. It was overwhelming and beautiful and terrifying all at once. Caleb got her through it, his arm around her, gently moving them toward their hotel. When they finally made it to their room, Allara collapsed on the bed, emotionally and physically exhausted. "You did it," Caleb said, sitting beside her. "We did it. No, this was you. You're the one who went back to Millbrook. You're the one who testified. You're the one who refused to be broken by their attacks." He took her hand. "I'm so damn proud of you. I couldn't have done it without you. Maybe. But you're the one who had the courage to try." Allara pulled him down beside her. "Take me home. I want to go home. Tomorrow, tonight, you rest." But sleep didn't come easily. Allara lay awake, one hand on her belly, feeling the baby move. She thought about her mother, who died never knowing her daughter would survive. She thought about Sarah, Caleb's first wife, whose books of poetry had helped Allara through the darkest winter. She thought about all the women who'd testified, who'd shared their pain so that future daughters might be spared. And she thought about the daughter she was carrying, who would grow up in a world that was slightly better, slightly more just, because women had refused to stay silent. It wasn't perfect. The work wasn't done. But it was something. It mattered. And tomorrow, they'd start the journey back to the mountain, back to the ranch, back to the life they were building. A life where Allara wasn't defined by what she could give or what she'd survived, but simply by who she chose to be. The journey home felt different, faster, somehow, though it took just as long. They stopped in Millbrook on the way, not because Allara wanted to, but because Caleb insisted there was one thing left to do. They found her father at the farm. It looked smaller than Allara remembered, shabbier. Marcus was there too, working on a broken fence. Her father saw her, saw Caleb, saw her pregnant belly, and his face went gray. "Allara, I heard about the trial." "Did you?" She stayed mounted, looking down at him. "Did you hear that your $50 investment in destroying me didn't pay off?" "I never meant—" "Yes, you did. You meant exactly what happened. You paid to have me declared worthless so you could sell me off and keep whatever dower you might have owed. Don't insult me by pretending it was anything else." Her father's shoulders sagged. For the first time, he looked old, defeated. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing. I don't want apologies I wouldn't believe. I don't want excuses. I don't want anything you have to give." She reached for Caleb's hand. "I just wanted you to see that I'm happy. that I built a life worth living despite everything you did to stop me. I wanted you to know that your worst act led to my best life, and there's nothing you can do to take that away from me. Marcus spoke up then. Allara, I'm glad. I'm glad you found something good. She looked at her brother, saw genuine emotion there. Thank you, Marcus. That actually means something. Then she turned her horse and rode away, Caleb beside her, and didn't look back. They made it home in mid-September, when the aspens were starting to turn gold and the first hints of autumn were coloring the air. The ranch looked perfect. Morrison had kept everything running, and the place had never looked better. That night, lying in their own bed, surrounded by familiar walls, Allara finally felt at peace. We should actually get married, Caleb said into the darkness, before the baby comes. Make it official. You asking? I'm asking. Then I'm saying yes. They were married 3 weeks later by a traveling preacher who came through the area twice a year. Morrison and his wife stood as witnesses. It was simple, quick, nothing like the elaborate weddings Allara had imagined as a girl. It was perfect. 2 months later, on a frigid November morning when the first real snow was falling, Allara went into labor. It lasted 14 hours, brutal and terrifying and harder than anything she'd ever done. Caleb stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand, letting her curse him, bringing water and towels and anything else Morrison's wife, who'd delivered half a dozen babies, demanded. And then, finally, a cry split the air. It's a girl, Morrison's wife announced, wrapping the baby in clean cloth. Healthy and loud. She placed the baby in Allara's arms. Tiny, red-faced, perfect. Allara looked down at her daughter and felt the last pieces of her old identity fall away completely. She wasn't barren, wasn't broken, wasn't worthless. She was a mother, a wife, a woman who'd fought for herself and won. She needs a name, Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. Allara thought for a moment. Hope. Her name is Hope, because that's what she represented. Not just new life, but proof that the future could be different from the past. That lies could be overcome. That women could fight back and win. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the mountain in white. Inside, a new family began their story, built not on what they'd lost, but on what they'd chosen to create together. And somewhere, in courtrooms and legislatures, in small towns and big cities, the work continued. Laws were changing. Women were speaking up. Daughters were being protected. The fight wasn't over. But it had begun. And that, Allara thought, holding her daughter close, was everything. Hope was 3 months old when the letters started arriving. The first came from a woman in Colorado who'd read about the trial in a newspaper. She'd been declared barren at 17, had believed it for 8 years, and was now expecting her first child. She wanted Allara to know that her testimony had given her the courage to question the diagnosis, to seek a second opinion, to hope. The second letter came from Montana, then Wyoming, then places Allara had never heard of, small towns scattered across the territory and beyond. Women writing to say thank you, to share their own stories, to ask for advice. Some were angry, some were grateful, some just needed someone to understand what they'd been through. Allara read every letter, tried to answer as many as she could, though with a newborn and a ranch to run, it was nearly impossible. You can't save everyone, Caleb said one night, finding her at the table at midnight, Hope sleeping in a basket beside her, pen in hand as she worked through another response. I'm not trying to save anyone. I'm just trying to let them know they're not alone. You need sleep. I need to finish this letter. Caleb sat down across from her. Allara, you're exhausted. You're still recovering from childbirth. You can't take on the weight of every woman who writes to you. Why not? Someone took on my weight when I needed it. Catherine, Margaret, all those women who testified. They didn't have to help me, but they did. That's different. They were organized, prepared. You're one person trying to respond to hundreds of letters while raising a baby and running a ranch. Allara set down her pen. He was right. She knew he was right. But it didn't change the feeling in her chest. These women have no one else. Their families don't believe them. Their communities condemn them. If I don't write back, who will? Then let me help. I can handle more of the ranch work. We can hire someone for the heavy labor. But you need to sleep, Allara. You're going to make yourself sick. She looked at him. This man who'd given her safety when she had none, who'd stood beside her through everything, who was now worried because she was trying to give others what had been given to her. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, you're right. I'll sleep. But tomorrow I'm still answering these letters. I wouldn't expect anything less. By the time Hope was 6 months old, the stream of letters had become a flood. Catherine Wells showed up again in early spring, this time with a proposal. We need to formalize this, she said, sitting at their table while Hope gummed a wooden spoon in Allara's lap. What started as a trial has become a movement. Women are organizing in every territory. We're pressuring legislatures, documenting cases of medical fraud, supporting each other. But it needs structure. What kind of structure? Caleb asked. An organization. Formal, with funding and volunteers and a clear mission. We're calling it the Women's Medical Rights Alliance. We want you to be part of it, Allara. Maybe even lead the Western Division. Allara stared at her. I can't lead anything. I have a 6-month-old baby and a ranch that barely runs itself. You don't have to do it alone. We'd provide support, resources, other organizers who can handle the day-to-day. But we need your voice, your story. You're the one who started this. I didn't start anything. I just got angry and refused to stay quiet. Exactly. And that's what we need. Not polished politicians or wealthy philanthropists. We need women who understand what it's like to be told you're worthless and to fight back anyway. Catherine stayed for 3 days, laying out the vision. Regional chapters, legal aid for women fighting fraudulent diagnoses, medical advocacy, educational programs. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious, but the need was undeniable. On the third night, after Catherine had gone to bed in their spare room, Allara and Caleb sat by the fire, Hope asleep between them. What do you think? Allara asked. I think you already know what you want to do. That's not an answer. Caleb was quiet for a moment. I think you have a gift for making people feel seen, for taking your own pain and transforming it into something that helps others. And I think if you don't do this, you'll regret it. But the ranch will survive. We'll hire help, like I said. Morrison's nephew is looking for work. We can bring him on full time. And Hope? We'll have a mother who's teaching her that women can change the world. That seems pretty valuable to me. Allara looked down at her daughter, this tiny person who existed because lies had been exposed, because Allara had refused to accept what she'd been told about herself. What kind of world did she want Hope to grow up in? One where women were still at the mercy of corrupt doctors and dismissive fathers, or one where they had advocates, resources, power? Okay, she said, I'll do it, but on my terms. I'm not leaving the ranch. I'm not moving to some city. If they want me, they get me as I am. A rancher's wife with a baby who's going to do this work around everything else in my life. Catherine agreed immediately. By summer, Allara was holding monthly meetings in Silverdale, helping women navigate medical consultations, connecting them with honest doctors, raising money for legal cases. Caleb hired Morrison's nephew, a quiet young man named Tom, who worked hard and asked few questions. The ranch adapted. Hope grew. Started crawling, then walking, then talking in that broken, beautiful way toddlers talk. She had Caleb's gray eyes and Allara's stubborn determination. By the time she was 2, she'd learned that when women gathered at their house for meetings, there were usually cookies, and she'd mastered the art of looking pathetic enough that someone would share. Your daughter is a manipulator, Catherine observed one afternoon, watching Hope work her magic on a visiting organizer. She's strategic, Allara corrected her. There's a difference. The work grew. The Women's Medical Rights Alliance expanded into 12 territories. Laws started changing, requirements for second opinions on diagnoses of infertility, penalties for doctors who took bribes, protections for women who challenged medical decisions. It was slow, frustrating, often felt like pushing a boulder uphill. But it was progress. Dr. Brennan was eventually found in California, tried, convicted of fraud, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. It wasn't enough. Nothing could be enough for the damage he'd done, but it was something, and it sent a message to other doctors engaging in similar practices. Allara's father died when Hope was 3. Marcus sent word, asking if she wanted to come to the funeral. She didn't. She'd said everything she needed to say to that man. His death changed nothing about what he'd done, and she refused to pretend grief she didn't feel. But she did write to Marcus, a short letter acknowledging his loss and wishing him well. He wrote back thanking her, and over the years they maintained a careful, distant correspondence. Not quite reconciliation, but not total estrangement either. It was all Allara could manage, and she made peace with that. Hope was 4 when she asked the question Allara had been dreading. They were in the garden, Sarah's garden, which Allara had restored and expanded. Hope was helping by digging holes randomly and putting rocks in them. "Mama, why don't I have a grandma and grandpa like Tommy Morrison?" Alara's hand stilled in the dirt. "You do have them. They just aren't here anymore." "Where are they? How did you explain death to a 4-year-old? How did you explain betrayal?" "My mama, your grandma, she died before you were born. She was sick. What about your papa?" He wasn't a very good papa, so we don't see him." Hope considered this with the seriousness only a 4-year-old could muster. "Did he do something bad?" "Yes." "Are you sad?" Allara thought about it honestly. "Not anymore. I was sad for a long time. Then I was angry. Now I'm mostly just done. He's not part of our life, and that's okay." "What about Daddy's mama and papa?" "They died a long time ago before I met Daddy." Hope nodded, then went back to digging, crisis apparently averted. But that night, tucking her daughter into bed, Allara found herself thinking about all the things Hope would never know. The grandmother who'd died too soon. The grandfather who'd sold his daughter. The first Mrs. Rourke whose book still sat on the shelf. "Mama?" Hope's sleepy voice pulled her back. "I'm glad you're my mama." Alara's throat tightened. "I'm glad I'm your mama too, sweetheart. Even though your papa was bad, especially because of that, it taught me how to be a better parent to you." Hope yawned. "Okay. Love you. Love you too." The years accumulated. Hope turned 5, then 6, then 7. A brother arrived when she was 5, a boy they named James, who was easier than Hope had been, but somehow got into twice as much trouble. Then another daughter when Hope was 8, Clara, who came into the world screaming and didn't stop for 6 months. The ranch expanded. Caleb and Allara bought adjacent land, increased the herd, built a proper house to replace the cabin. They kept the cabin, though. It held too many memories to abandon. It became Caleb's workshop in winter, a quiet place to escape when the main house got too chaotic. The Women's Medical Rights Alliance continued its work. Allara eventually stepped back from active leadership, though she remained on the advisory board. Younger women with more time and energy took over the day-to-day organizing, and Allara found herself in the role of elder stateswoman, offering guidance based on experience rather than leading from the front. She was fine with that. The work had been necessary, but exhausting. She'd given what she could. Now it was someone else's turn. Hope was 12 when she asked the question that mattered. They were riding fence line together. Allara checking for damage, Hope along for the ride because she loved any excuse to be on a horse. It was a clear autumn day, the kind that made you grateful to be alive. "Mama, Miss Henderson at school told us about the trial. About you." Allara kept her eyes on the fence. "Did she?" "She said you changed laws, that you helped a lot of women." "I helped some women. Others did most of the actual work. But you testified, even though people said mean things about you, even though you were pregnant and scared." Allara glanced at her daughter. Hope looked so much like her at that age, same dark hair, same serious expression, but there was a confidence there that Allara had never possessed as a child. Hope knew she was valued, knew she mattered. That changed everything. "I did. I was terrified the whole time." "But you did it anyway." "Yes." "Why?" It was the simplest question and the hardest to answer. Allara reined in her horse, turned to face her daughter fully. "Because I was angry, and because I realized that anger could either destroy me or drive me to make things better. I chose better." She paused. "And because I wanted you to grow up in a world where no one could tell you you were worthless and make it stick, where you'd have protections, resources, people who'd believe you if something was wrong." Hope nodded slowly. "Miss Henderson said some girls' fathers still do bad things, that the work isn't finished. It's not. Probably never will be. There will always be people who try to control women, diminish them, profit off them. The fight doesn't end." "Then why did you stop?" Allara smiled. "I didn't stop. I just changed how I fight. I raise you and your brother and sister to know your worth. I support the women still doing the organizing. I share my story when it helps. That's still fighting, just differently. I want to fight too. When I'm older, then you will. But Hope?" Allara reached over, took her daughter's hand. "Remember that fighting isn't just about big dramatic gestures. Sometimes it's about refusing to accept what people say about you. Sometimes it's about helping one person who needs it. Sometimes it's just about surviving with your dignity intact. All of that matters. Hope squeezed her hand. I'll remember. They rode on in comfortable silence, checking fence, watching the cattle, existing in a moment of peace that Allara had learned to appreciate. These were the real victories, not the laws or the trials, but these quiet afternoons with her daughter, teaching her to be strong without teaching her to be hard. Hope was 15 when she came home from school, fury radiating from every pore. They expelled Margaret Chen, she announced, slamming her books on the table. Allara looked up from the bread she was kneading. Who's Margaret Chen? A girl in the upper form. She's Chinese. Her parents run the laundry in Silverdale. The school board decided she shouldn't be educated with white students anymore. Just decided. Like she's not good enough. The rage in Hope's voice was achingly familiar. Allara had sounded exactly like that once. What did the teacher say? That it wasn't their decision to make. That they had to follow the board's rules. Hope paced the kitchen. It's not fair. Margaret's smarter than half the boys in school. She shouldn't be punished just because of where her parents were born. You're right, it's not fair. So what do we do? We. Not what should someone do, but what do we do? Allara felt pride surge through her. What do you want to do? Hope stopped pacing. I want to fight, like you did, but I don't know how. Allara wiped her hands on her apron, sat down at the table. First, you talk to Margaret. Find out what she wants. This is her fight. You're just supporting her. Second, you organize. Talk to other students, see who else thinks this is wrong. Third, you make noise. Write letters. Show up at school board meetings. Refuse to let them ignore it. Will it work? Maybe. Maybe not. Sometimes you fight and lose, but you fight anyway because the alternative is accepting injustice. Hope's jaw set in that stubborn way she had. Will you help me? Absolutely. The fight for Margaret Chen took 6 months. Hope organized the students, Allara organized the parents. They petitioned, protested, made themselves impossible to ignore. The school board held firm at first, then started to crack under pressure. In the end, they reversed the decision, not out of principle, but because the community pressure became too costly to resist. It wasn't a complete victory. The rules didn't change, only the application of them in this one case. But Margaret got to finish her education, and Hope learned what her mother had learned years before. The change was possible, but it required refusing to be quiet. James was different from his sister. Where Hope was fierce and direct, James was thoughtful, strategic. He could talk anyone into anything, and he used that gift to mediate conflicts, build consensus, smooth over rough edges. Clara, the youngest, was pure determination in a small package. By the time she was 8, she'd decided she was going to be a doctor, and nothing anyone said could dissuade her. Watching them grow, Allara sometimes marveled at how different they all were, how they'd each taken pieces of her and Caleb and created something entirely their own. None of them were perfect. Hope was too quick to anger. James sometimes avoided confrontation when he should engage. Clara was stubborn to the point of mule-headedness. But they were good humans, kind and strong and unafraid to stand up for what mattered. That was the real legacy, Allara realized. Not the laws or the organizations or the newspaper articles. It was these 3 people who would go into the world knowing they had value, knowing they could fight back, knowing that injustice didn't have to be accepted just because it was common. Caleb was 50 when his heart first gave him trouble. Nothing dramatic, just breathlessness after exertion, chest pain that he tried to hide. Allara knew anyway. She'd learned to read him over 18 years of marriage. The doctor in Silverdale was honest. His heart's weak. Could be genetic, could be all those years of hard labor. Either way, he needs to slow down. He won't, Allara said. Then he'll die. Maybe next year, maybe in 10 years. But working the way he has been will kill him eventually. Allara forced Caleb to hire more help, to delegate, to accept that he couldn't do everything anymore. He hated it, but he did it because he wanted to see his children grow up more than he wanted to prove he was still strong. They had 7 more years. 7 years of slower mornings, longer evenings, moments stolen from work to just be together. 7 years of watching their children become adults. Hope heading off to college in the East, James taking over more of the ranch management, Clara studying medicine through correspondence courses because no school would accept a woman yet. 7 years of a love that had started in desperation and grown into something solid and real and absolutely irreplaceable. Caleb died on a Tuesday morning in October, sitting in his chair by the fire, book open on his lap. Peaceful, the doctor said. His heart just stopped. Allara held it together through the funeral, through the visitors offering condolences, through all the practical matters of death. Then, when everyone had left and the house was quiet, she went to the old cabin, the place where they'd first lived together, where everything had started, and let herself break. She cried for the man she'd loved, for the life they'd built, for all the years they wouldn't have together. She cried for the girl she'd been when she arrived here, so broken and scared, and for the woman he'd helped her become. But she didn't cry because she regretted anything. Even knowing how it would end, she'd choose it all again. Choose him. Choose this life. Choose the hard, beautiful work of building something real. Hope came home from college. James and Clara circled close. They grieved together, told stories, remembered. And slowly, the acute pain of loss settled into something more manageable, a permanent ache, but one that coexisted with gratitude. Allara was 62 when Catherine Wells died, 70 when Margaret Thorne followed. The women who'd fought alongside her were aging, passing, leaving the work to younger hands. The Women's Medical Rights Alliance was still going strong, now operating in 30 states, but Allara's role in it had long since become purely symbolic. She spent her time on the ranch, smaller now, run mostly by James and his wife, and with her grandchildren. Hope had 3 daughters of her own and was teaching law at a university back east. James had 2 sons working the land alongside him. Clara had finally, against all odds, become a doctor, one of the first women to graduate from a Western medical school. They visited when they could, bringing noise and chaos and life to the house. Allara loved it, though it exhausted her more quickly than it used to. One afternoon, Hope's eldest daughter, named Sarah, after the first Mrs. Rourke, asked to hear the story. She was 14, old enough to understand, and she'd heard bits and pieces, but never the whole thing. So Allara told it, all of it. The diagnosis, the sale, the mountain, Caleb, the storm, the pregnancy, the trial. She told it honestly, including the parts that were ugly and hard and showed her at her worst, because sanitizing the story would diminish it, would make it seem like victory was inevitable when it had been anything but. Sarah listened with wide eyes, occasionally interrupting with questions. When Allara finished, her great-granddaughter was quiet for a long time. "Were you scared?" she asked finally. "When you testified?" "Terrified." "But you did it anyway." "Yes." "Why?" Allara looked at this girl who bore the name of a woman she'd never met, but had honored through building a life in the space Sarah had left behind. "Because I learned something important on that mountain. I learned that I was stronger than I thought I was. And once you know that about yourself, really know it, it becomes impossible to stay silent when something is wrong. Is that what you want me to learn too? I want you to learn that your worth isn't determined by what others say about you, that you have the right to question authority, to demand better, to fight for yourself and for others, that being afraid doesn't mean you can't act, it just means you act despite the fear." Sarah nodded slowly. "Grandma Hope says you changed the world." Allara laughed. "I changed some laws. The world's a lot bigger than that. But you made things better. I helped. A lot of people helped. That's how change really works. Not one hero, but thousands of people doing what they can with what they have." "I want to do that too." "Then you will. The fight's not over, Sarah. Every generation has to take it up again, push it further. Your battles will look different from mine, but they'll be just as important." That night, sitting alone on the porch of the house she and Caleb had built, Allara thought about legacy. Not the formal kind, the laws and organizations and historical footnotes, but the real kind. The grandchildren who knew their worth, the great-granddaughters who were being raised to question, to fight, to refuse limitation. She thought about the woman she'd been at 24, being dragged through the snow, convinced she was worthless. If she could go back and tell that woman what was coming, the pain, yes, but also the love, the strength, the family, the purpose, would she believe it? Probably not. That woman was too broken to imagine healing, too convinced of her own worthlessness to see potential. But she'd survived anyway. had stumbled into this life almost by accident and then fought like hell to keep it, to build it, to transform it into something meaningful. Allara was 76 when she died, surrounded by children and grandchildren in the house she and Caleb had built together. Her last words were to Hope, who was holding her hand. "You did good, Mama," Hope whispered. "You did so good." Allara smiled. "We all did. Every single one of us who refused to stay quiet. That's what mattered." The funeral was enormous. Women came from across the country. Women she'd helped. Women who'd heard her story. Women who'd carried forward the work she'd started. The Women's Medical Rights Alliance sent representatives. Her children spoke, then her grandchildren. Stories were told, tears were shed, laughter rang out alongside grief. They buried her next to Caleb on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple stone that read, "Allara Vance Rourke. She refused to be broken." But the real monument wasn't the stone or the laws or even the organization. It was the thousands of women who'd heard her story and found courage in it, the daughters who were raised knowing their worth, the systems that had changed, however incrementally, because she and others like her had refused to accept injustice. The fight continued. New battles emerged: voting rights, workplace equality, bodily autonomy. Each generation faced its own struggles, carried forward the work in its own way. But they did it standing on the foundation that women like Allara had built. Women who'd been told they were worthless and had refused to believe it. Women who'd transformed their pain into purpose, their anger into action. And in that way, the story didn't really end. It just kept going, carried forward by everyone who heard it and decided that they too would refuse to be silent, refuse to be diminished, refuse to accept that the world couldn't change. Because it could change. It did change. One fight at a time, one voice at a time, one woman standing up and saying no more. That was the lesson. That was the legacy. That was the truth that Allara's life had proven beyond doubt. You are not what others say about you. You are what you choose to become. And sometimes the act of choosing, the act of fighting back, the act of refusing to be broken, that changes everything, not just for you, for everyone who comes after.